So I haven't been climbing at all. There's been a lot going on in my life: work, friends, family, finances, shelter, health. They all kind of pull us in different directions, but it's all felt very out of my control as of late. And I think to paint a more full picture, I want to rewind a little bit back just before I started Zen Story. Laura and I were kind of stuck. We were somewhere between burning a candle at both ends and complacency, if that makes any sense at all. We were together for over a decade and hustling for even longer, and yet we didn't feel like we were really steering the ship. Homeownership was a pretty big goal of ours, and I know you've heard this before, the plight of the millennial, first world problems, all of that stuff. But, it was a serious goal that we were striving towards, and yet it seemed like the goalpost kept being pushed further and further away. And we were working hard, sacrificing, not traveling, not going on vacation, not going out, not spending any money at all. And yet it still just seemed like it was something that we couldn't achieve. And yeah, it kind of felt like we were moving in slow motion, or maybe not moving at all. We were just kind of stagnant. Before I started climbing, I caught myself starting to feel apathetic to most things. Climbing breathed a new sense of adventure in me. It opened my eyes to new places, new sights, new people. I think sometimes the way I talk about climbing makes me sound like a bit of a crackhead, and I think I'm okay with that because it's not far off the truth. I was enamored by it, and I still am. Even just talking about climbing can be exciting to me, and the opportunity to do just that on here, combined with all of the climbing footage I've been collecting, and it was kind of a no-brainer, and thus Zen Story was born. But I think I should bring some context to that and try to explain what Zen Story is. And I'm not honestly entirely sure what it is, but I can tell you what it was supposed to be. I wanted it to kind of be like a collaboration between friends and my peers, kind of document their achievements, the Zens, and inject a little bit of storytelling and personality and stoke into that. But being a bit introverted, I actually found it quite hard to ask people if they wanted to participate. So it kind of just ended up being my stories. But honestly, that was never the intent. And maybe one day I can collaborate with some people. But who really knows? So I guess I'm not really answering that question that no one asked of what Zen Story is, but I guess as people like to yell out in jest as I walk into the climbing gym, "Yo, Zen Story, what up?" I guess Zen Story is me, for now anyways. So I think I want to just lean into that a bit and talk about me. I'm not a pessimist, nor do I consider myself an optimist. I think I land somewhere in the middle. But I definitely skew towards the more positive side of things. That's kind of what I want to put out into the universe. There's already a lot of negativity out there, and I don't feel like I should be somebody to contribute to that. But at the same time, I don't think that's being completely honest either. I struggle with what stories to tell, or at least how to narrate them. I struggle with what version of myself to show you. I don't think that's disingenuous. I think, like most, I'm multifaceted, and it all has to do with what side of me I'm comfortable with showing my audience, whoever that audience might be. I think my peers, you included, possibly see me as someone who's positive and optimistic, and I don't think that's wrong. I like to have fun. I like to laugh. I like to see people smile. But like most of you, I'm multifaceted. I have anxiety. I can be depressed. I can be angry. I can be an asshole. I can be short-sighted, and that list goes on. I'm introverted. I can lose touch with people that I'm very close with, and in the same breath, I can turn and talk somebody's ear off. Those sides of me are just as real as the positive, fun, sometimes funny, sometimes interesting, sometimes sincere, sometimes adventurous person that I am as well. And I think I'm saying all this because this video might seem like a bit of a deviation from my others. It's not going to be about climbing or building something or adventuring or whatever label I want to put on my videos. It's just going to be about me. And it's honestly not going to be very cheerful. Although I hope that it ends with some optimism, or at the least you knowing a lot more about me. And I guess this is a pretty good time for a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about some traumatic things that have happened to me, and if that makes you uncomfortable or that's just not what you want to watch today, it's totally cool if you switch this off and go to another video. I won't be offended. Might I suggest one of my other videos? But yeah, I want to take this back to that stagnant time in our lives. We kind of always wanted to do things in the right order. We wanted to have stable jobs, stable house, then kids. We wanted to raise them in a place they could play, experience the outdoors, grow up in a community that could grow with them. These were all things that we had valued and maybe experienced ourselves in some capacity. But with the housing market the way it was, getting a first home started to seem like a pipe dream. So we kind of kept passively looking, but finally just said, F it, let's try for kids now and figure out the rest later. Hell, that's probably what everyone else does anyways. At the same time, we had been working very hard and overdue for a vacation, so we decided to take a family vacation down to South Carolina to celebrate my parents' anniversary. Although that meant celebrating this very differently, namely no drinking or hot tubs, seeing as we were trying to have a kid, and knowing what we were sacrificing, including the impending arguments with my family when we wouldn't partake in their festivities and they didn't understand, we decided to carve a small piece of vacation out for ourselves on the way down there. And we spent a morning climbing in Rumbling Bald in North Carolina. I still long to go back there because it was extremely short, and honestly, it was the last time we traveled and the last real vacation that we had. And in hindsight, all of that felt kind of like the calm before the storm, because upon arriving home, a certain virus decided to turn everything upside down. Like for most, the first few months were a bit rough. The anxiety, the isolation, but we also had the addition of Laura being an ICU nurse and all of the baggage that comes along with that. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Laura had a bout with anaphylaxis, nearly unable to breathe, and we were in and out of emerge for several days. It was most likely caused by one of the stand-in sanitizers they were using when there were supply issues, but it was scary to say the least, especially in the middle of us trying to have kids. On that front, things weren't going so well, so we sought help. We learned that the pain Laura had felt since an adolescent was endometriosis, and we would require fertility treatment and eventually IVF. We also discovered that Laura's abdomen was filled with endometriomas that would require surgery. And since bad timing also seems to be our thing, I ended up herniating myself quite badly at the same time and also required surgery. The recovery was slower than expected, and it kind of turned my already dwindling climbing endeavors into something completely non-existent. But I was lucky because I went to a specialized surgical hospital where other hospitals were overwhelmed, and Laura's surgery was pushed back months and months. As the hospitals continued to be overwhelmed, they started diverting resources away from their surgical units, and just a few days before Laura's surgery, she was notified that it was canceled. We were left pretty devastated and kind of just waiting to no end. This was a bit of a tipping point for us. There was no house, there was no kid, and there was no surgery. So we decided the only thing that we could control was the family dog. So we put the deposit on Barley. After all, this could be our only family member. And we actually made a video about that. So if you want to have a little pick-me-up after this one, might I suggest that video because she is extremely cute. In parallel to this, we were also still kind of passively house hunting, and we saw this house we liked that was only slightly out of our budget and in a neighboring city. So we kind of just put an offer in, not expecting anything. This was the 9th place that we put a very solid offer on, and we weren't expecting anything to come of it. But to our surprise, they accepted our offer, and within 24 hours, we had a deposit on a dog, and we had an acceptance on a house. And then to kind of top that all off, we had noticed that Laura's surgery was finally rescheduled, but unfortunately just a few days before we got Barley and 2 weeks before we moved. 3 very awesome things at very inconvenient times. Laura's surgery went well, as well as removing several golf ball-sized endometriomas and one nearly the size of a Nerf football can. Yeah, it was invasive, and her recovery was quite slow, which meant I was down my main helper for our move, which was a disaster. I touch on that in another video, but for some reason I kind of downplay it. It was a mess, and because of that, we still kind of haven't fully moved in yet. Well, that and a bunch of other things that I swear I'm getting to, so bear with me. And while the previous homeowners gave us a very tough time and the move was a disaster because of it, things seemed to be on a bit of an upswing. We had the dog, a house, and now Laura's surgery complete. But in almost comedic timing, there was a gas leak in the house, which meant they cut off our utilities, so we had no gas for almost a week or more than a week. Then our faithful Matrix, yes, the car from all of our road trip videos, died on us, which... this might sound silly, but it was actually quite sad. We had a lot of really good memories in that car, and it kind of was a bit of a time capsule for a better time. After that, our other car was also rear-ended. Luckily, Laura and Barley, who were in the car at the time, were okay, but it was rendered undrivable. So 3 seemingly awesome things followed by 3 pretty shitty things. And it seemed kind of like our bad luck just had to end. But I was blindsided when I learned that my best friend from high school had decided to take his own life. I clearly haven't really come to terms with it, and I don't know if I ever will. I have lots of regrets there, and I have lots of things that were left unsaid. But Laura and I, we tried to stay optimistic and carry on with our fertility treatment. But after a couple failed pregnancies and a pretty traumatic miscarriage, we knew something still wasn't right. Laura's endometriosis had continued to grow, and she would require yet another surgery, but this time they were going to remove a portion of her organs along with it. While recovering, Laura suffered a bowel obstruction, which, if you don't know, it is one of the most painful ailments that you can experience. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. She was rushed to the hospital, and they treated it conservatively, giving her pain medication and sending her home with a liquid diet and eventually soft foods. But then 2 months later, while driving out of town, Laura suffered another one. We had to make an emergency stop off at a hospital, and to make matters worse, they were still overwhelmed, and we had to wait 5 hours to be seen. That's 5 hours waiting in the most excruciating pain you can experience. She was vomiting out of control, and seemed delirious. My mind's gone to some pretty scary places this past year. But in those moments, I felt both useless and helpless at the same time. It was really scary. She was admitted and spent 5 days in the hospital. They discussed emergency surgery as a last resort, but again, treated conservatively. It was quite difficult having to drive from our home to this other town every day just to see her. But luckily it passed on its own, and she was sent home with orders to permanently change her diet, which she did, thank God, so we could return to some level of normalcy. As the months passed and the pain was a distant memory, we continued with our IVF. But we were down to our last embryo, which meant this was the last chance for Laura to get pregnant. But it worked, and she was pregnant. We kind of celebrated quietly because we had been here before. We knew that this didn't really mean anything yet, but as the appointments passed and weeks passed, we started to realize that this was actually happening. Although it was kind of weird, it was like we were tiptoeing around something that should have been exciting and celebrated. But as the months went on and it seemed more real, we started to accept it, and we knew that Laura was pregnant and there was a baby on the way. So we started planning our announcement on Thanksgiving when everyone was going to be gathered all together. It was kind of perfect timing. And just a couple days before we were to fly to Hawaii for a friend's wedding. A lot of stuff to look forward to, and a well-deserved turnaround in our lives. But I've mentioned our luck a few times here before, and Laura suffered another obstruction. Except this time she was 3 months pregnant. She was admitted to the hospital, where she spent another week there. They mentioned surgery again, but with the pregnancy, they wanted to be cautious and treat it conservatively. We bumped our flights back a few days in the hopes that we would barely make the wedding. We were the ones who were bringing their wedding rings, after all. And we kind of cautiously and quietly let our parents know about the pregnancy, but there was no big announcement, and there was no celebration. Luckily, on the day we were originally supposed to fly out, it passed yet again, and we barely made it home, barely packed, barely slept, and flew to Hawaii to barely make the wedding. But as nervous as we were to be away from home with a chance of another medical issue, we were very excited to be there. This was our first vacation we had in years, and the first time we had traveled in years, to Hawaii of all places. And as the anxieties started to melt away, we actually started to feel pretty relaxed and more like ourselves. And this trip, honestly, was well-deserved and one of the happiest moments that we've experienced in a very long time. We flew home refreshed, kind of ready to take on the world. But you know, one step forward, two steps back, because Laura suffered another obstruction. But this time it was different. Her pain was everywhere. It was constant. It didn't come in waves like it had before. She was hospitalized again. And after a week of hospitalization and her entire diet coming through central IV line, they made the call that they had to go in for surgery. Her doctor held back no punches. He was pretty honest with us and just said, you know, Laura's my patient, and without her, there's no baby. And while I do appreciate that his priorities were in the right place, this was pretty hard for me to hear. After surgery, They were able to detect a heartbeat in her abdomen. Both Laura and the baby were okay, which is all that we could ask for. And we're glad they did the surgery, because it ends up that her intestines had become entangled in themselves and they had completely strangled off and started to die. They had to cut out a portion of it and reattach it. It was quite an invasive surgery, and her recovery was quite long. She spent weeks more in the hospital before she was able to eat on her own. She returned home a shell of herself, but still pregnant. And honestly, probably in a better mental state than she's been in a very long time. I think I can say with full honesty that this year and some of the time leading up to it has been the worst period of time in my life. I have had some beautiful things happen, but they've been eclipsed by some of the worst things ever. And there's more that has been sprinkled in there that I didn't even talk about because it pales in comparison to everything else. I honestly don't really know why I'm sitting here telling you this. These are all things I struggle to tell people who are sitting right in front of me. I guess maybe if you're struggling, this could help you realize that you're not alone. Maybe if you're not struggling, it opens your eyes to things people are going through all around you, and that the slightest kind gesture goes a very long way. I guess it gives me the opportunity to vent, and editing this together, however I'm going to do that, will give me some focus and something to put my energy into. Maybe it helps give you context as to why I haven't had the mental capacity or time to even think about climbing, even though it honestly means a lot to me, maybe too much. Honestly, I've been lacking motivation, to say the least, and things have kind of lost their flavor a little bit. With all that said, I did manage to get some footage while in Hawaii when we were feeling more like ourselves. So maybe that will be the next video I post, and it will be in the more optimistic tone that you might be used to. If I have to try to conclude all these thoughts, I guess I can just say that this has been a pretty dark time for me and Laura, but I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I try to remain optimistic. After all, holy shit, I'm going to be a dad, and I think I have a lot to look forward to. So if you've stuck around this long, I appreciate you doing so. And thanks for letting me get this off my chest. I look forward to editing the next video, whenever that's going to be. And I hope you do as well. All right, take it easy. Peace out.